All right, morning, everybody. Morning, everybody. Um, I will kick off this meeting as the facilitator, but not the presenter. This is a special meeting for the ESInet user group is intended to have CenturyLink present on tariff amendments as they see through the lens of CenturyLink. And I'm going to kick it over to Tim Kunkelman. Do we still have people coming in, Jennifer? I see
We
the screen
do, and
expanding.
before Tim takes over, I'm just going to make the disclaimer that the only official record of this meeting will be the one that the commission maintains through this recording and its transcript.
Great, thanks, Jennifer. So I see my screen keeps getting smaller and smaller with the number of people joining. So maybe we give them a minute or so, Tim, and then I'll kick it off to you to present and lead.
Steve, we're slowing down now. Are you ready for Tim to go?
Yep, I think that's probably a good time. Tim, it's all yours.
Thanks. I'm just looking to see who else is joined. These meetings usually don't have a reminder, so sometimes folks get a little behind. Let me just check in with a couple of people here. Bear with me, please. Okay. Thanks for that. We'll see if we get a couple others that can answer some of the more technical questions. But we did, so we did send out the latest amendment draft. Appreciate Steve yours and Kathy's help getting that sent out. I don't know if folks want me to walk through it. I mean, it's not anything different than we've seen over the past 12 plus months. I think we just finally have been able to get to the point where we can put this in front of you all in the commission and move forward with it. So I don't know if there's just some general questions that folks want to ask about it.
Let's walk through it.
What's that?
Can we walk through it?
Sure. Just it's on the screen here. Or is that showing up?
Yeah, Tim, we can see it.
Just again, check and see. May have joined. All right, so it'd just be this new section in the tariff, or a new section number 27. Shouldn't say new section, a new entry under 925B. It is for the GIS routing. And then the rate there below. This would be a required service under the rules of a core service. There isn't any time frame to make this effective in terms of being required. I know we've talked about that in the past, and I think that's still something that we can discuss. But as you can see on the screen, it would just go into effect once it's approved. I see Michael's got a hand up.
Hi, Tim. A couple things. Real quick, since you just said on a timeline, it does specify required by March 1, 2026.
You're right. We did change that. I'm sorry. I thought we had left that out. My apologies. I guess that goes. I guess the reason behind that is it coincides with the funding, right? So I guess it could be purchased sooner, but the state wouldn't provide any funding until it goes through that funding process, and then have it be effective in March. So thanks for that. I'm sorry.
And has this already been presented to the PUC so that it can be accounted for as they're going through different rate setting? So it would
not yet. Hasn't been officially proposed to the PUC. We wanted to have some conversations with you all first.
Okay, so that might be an issue with the timing of that funding. Separate from that, section D there in the middle is accurate, real-time, accurate location. Am I reading that wrong? Is that redundancy, or am I missing something with that?
It seems like the word if should not be there, right?
Well, accurate used twice.
Is accurate used twice?
Accurate.
Yeah, I
Not
think
good
if is
English.
okay, just a little redundancy is all. And sorry, this is Matt. Tim, I wonder if earlier you were referring to prior discussions about including delayed implementation because of costs from the last go around.
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the things that had come up, was just timing wise as well, just for readiness and things like that. So that was something that we had put out there before.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's off the table.
Is this service required for for like phase one next gen 911 service? They're talking, that the OSP delivery, is this required for any of those services, phase one or phase two?
I do not know the answer to that.
And is this a service that you're going to be actually using, on March 20th? Are you going to be doing GIS routing on March 20th? Or whatever that date is, March 1st, 2026?
Yes, that would be the idea. Yes.
Are you doing GIS routing now?
I don't know. I didn't think so. Not under this.
Yeah, I I thought there had to be changes in what you were getting from carriers for GIS routing. So I just wanted to make sure that we're not paying for a service we're not getting.
Andrew, you got your hand up?
Yeah, Tim, can you elaborate on, let's see here. The bullet point E. So the monthly recovering charge covers initial and ongoing GIS boundary management support. What boundary management support will Lumen be providing?
I know, Jeff Winkleman, are you on? Can you answer that question?
I am on. What, Andrew, did you say what boundary information are we going to be providing?
Well, it says GIS boundary management support. So when I read that, I think, okay, Lumen's going to help us maintain in perpetuity our GIS boundaries, which is something that, you know, there's a couple of different projects, both the resource center as well as the enterprise has been asked to look into this. If this is going to be covered by the MRC, then awesome, but I want to verify that.
Right. No, that's a good question. Unfortunately, one I don't have an answer for. We'd have to probably get with Rich Johnson from Intrado to verify for sure. I don't know if Rich Johnson, if he's on or not. I saw somebody with the number ending in 1329 jumped on, but I don't see him on here other than that.
Yeah, I haven't seen him or Steve.
And I know Steve Deloche is traveling right now, so I'll send them both messages and see if we can get them on here to answer that question.
Yeah, and I had sent them a message too.
Okay.
And then, and I see Matt's got his hand up, and maybe he can answer this question himself. To Joe Bankert's earlier question, will this GIS routing become redundant once we have phase 2 in place, we have an I3 compliant, you know, core services, and the OSPs have their LIS servers up and running? Is this still going to be required at that point?
My understanding is yes. This would be the transition to all routing would be done using this particular service. So this would replace the existing routing.
Matt, you have your hand up, and if you have anything to add to Andrew's question.
Yeah, thinking back on prior discussions in statewide stakeholder meetings, such as task force, ESInet users group, and my own discussions with Rich, part of the genesis for the Resource Center GIS project establishing a statewide GIS layer of PSAP boundaries with clean edge matching was for this purpose. And then going forward in the future, that would sort of be the foundation. So for example, the Resource Center ends up providing a clean PSAP boundaries feature class for Intrado to use instead of Intrado's own private internal version of PSAP boundaries, right? So it would be all PSAP boundaries authoritatively approved by the governing bodies as a kickstart that would be handed over to Intrado to use instead of Intrado's private version of boundaries that they've been sort of developing internally by working with us local stakeholders on our VoIP and wireless routing boundaries in their function in Intrado's function as an intermediary for those phone companies. Then from that point forward, any changes that would be needed to our PSAP boundaries. Andrew, let's say you had a PSAP boundary change and your GIS team creates a new version of that. You would upload it to Intrado's NG911 spatial interface. Intrado would need to make sure that that boundary doesn't create a conflict or leave a gap with any neighboring boundaries. So that's where the boundary management support comes in, is they would first triage it, right? Look at it. If there's an issue, then they would try to facilitate closure or resolution of any problems with neighboring boundaries before implementation of the change.
So Entrada would be maintaining the authoritative boundaries rather than the state maintaining them, and Entrada uploading them from the state.
I think a better way to think of it would be we, the governing bodies, would maintain them by uploading them to Intrado, who would host them for use in providing the service. And I know that's could be called a matter of semantics, but there are boundaries. Intrado would host them in a statewide feature class for use in GIS routing and then in the rest of the NG core services as they're added.
So Matt,
But
with that explanation, does that mean that Intrado holds the governance, or Intrado, the governance sits with Intrado for the statewide layer?
Yeah,
It
I don't know if governance is the right word. I think the concept is correct, right? Intrado is going to need for there to be no gaps and overlaps between any of the PSAP boundaries in order for GIS routing to work, right? Because if the GPS or GIS calculated coordinates for a device land in an area where there's a gap between PSAPs, where there's a gap, there is no known PSAP for that location, right? So you can't have any gaps. You can't have any overlaps, because if you have an overlap and the coordinates for a device land in that overlap, well, now the system has no definitive answer. It has two possible PSAPs to send the call to because their boundaries overlap, and so it does not definitively know which PSAP should get the call. And so Intrado would facilitate ongoing management support to ensure that no new gaps and overlaps are introduced into this statewide layer that's hosted within Intrado's GIS for routing decision purposes.
And then would Entrado make that update available to Comtech and T-Mobile, so everybody's working with the same boundaries?
I can't answer for Intrado on that aspect. I can't see why they wouldn't. There's language in the proposed tariff amendment that speaks to CenturyLink not holding ownership of the data, right? So that's why I'm talking about it in terms of it's really our data provided to CenturyLink and therefore Intrado, hosted within Intrado's GIS solely for the purpose of GIS routing in this particular tariff amendment. I don't know if they would share it. I can't imagine they wouldn't upon request, but I don't know.
So what you're saying, Matt, is very similar to what we do locally. At least I can use our area as an example. The municipalities hold the governance of the data. They hand it over to us as the PSAP or the telephone authority, whichever workflow you have. And it is our responsibility for the data integrity of all of the different areas to bring together to use for functionality of CAD or however we want to use it as a PSAP. And then example is actually getting pushed up even higher level, and the governance, or I'd say more data integrity for the phone routing, sits with Intrado because they're aggregating everybody's data into one for use in phone routing. Is that correct?
Yes, that's a very good analogy, right? So in the future, when we get to a point where we, the governing bodies, our PSAPs or our GIS agents are also uploading address points, GIS address points, road center lines, GIS provisioning boundaries, right? The area for which your GIS agent or you are authoritative in your GIS data, and then emergency service boundaries to someday eventually replace or in addition to PSAP boundaries, right? Your law, fire, and EMS boundaries. That same aggregation and management support will have to continue with all of those layers, GIS layers as well at Intrado's level, because Intrado needs to ensure a minimum level of quality and completeness in order for the next generation GIS-based core services to function properly. And again, it kind of goes back to the no gaps and overlaps so that the system can run its GIS analyses on the fly without question about which PSAP should this be, right? So that then determines the routing of the call. Another way to think about this first step is if we sort of draw almost a parallel to LBR, location-based routing, right? Right now, the OSPs, or more likely their intermediaries, Intrado and Comtech, are doing a version of this privately within their systems and partnership. The way that they're determining which PSAP to suggest to the BESP for a call is they're doing this same process, but they're using their own privately created PSAP boundaries, which are not necessarily authoritative and approved by the governing bodies. And so LBR is effectively a suggestion from the OSP or their intermediary as to which PSAP should get the call. This tariff amendment, another way to think about it is moving that LBR function into BES, being performed by the BESP and its contractor.
So if Intrado rather than OIT is going to maintain the authoritative version, does that need to be reflected in the tariff? I would think it should be. Especially we want them to be providing it to Comtech and T-Mobile for their routing purposes.
Well, I think it's covered, maybe not explicitly, but I think it's covered in the implication in B27E, GIS boundary management support. And I don't know, I see your point about those other companies for their LBR purposes, but I don't know that that's an obligation that could be rightly put in a tariff regarding service by CenturyLink.
Sure, it could. And I don't believe that you put things implicit in contracts. You want them to be explicit so there's no ambiguity.
And it could be explicitly elsewhere, and I just don't see it at the moment.
And what is the language that you're thinking of, Joe?
The obligation of Intrado to be maintaining the authoritative boundary map. And I don't know if you were talking also, Matt, about the internal like response area maps, but the maps that then also need to be propagated out to the OSPs and Comtech, who represents some OSPs, for their GIS routing in their delivery of the call to Intrado.
So
CenturyLink.
the thing is, Joe, the OSPs don't have to have that data for delivering and handing off calls to the BESP.
Well, the way it was described on one of the calls is that the data gets received by Intrado, and then even though it's in that data is within that, and I think that's what's expected in the NINA standards, that then Intrado redips because usually it gets more accurate in the microseconds it takes for the call to reach Intrado.
So the OSPs have to provide coordinates or dispatchable location. They don't have to provide anything with any sort of PSAP boundary information or ESB information, at least to my knowledge. I certainly think that we would want to be able to acquire copies of that.
Would the OSP even have the boundary information other than just the location? They
So-
wouldn't know where the boundaries are, would they?
So Kevin, the example I used earlier where let's say Nuclear Narita Wireless, Nuclear Narita NNTC Wireless, right?
Right.
Cellular service company. Through RENA Wireless, a rural wireless association, they contract with Intrado to be their third-party intermediary, providing 911 services to the OSPs.
Right.
As part of that service, Intrado maintains in its GIS department its own private version of PSAP boundaries.
Right.
And it uses those PSAP boundaries to estimate the LBR PSAP recommendation for NNTC wireless 911 call. Right? So those are maintained in a separate private services database, not a part of BES, right? It's not that's Intrado wearing its OSP services hat, not Intrado wearing its BES services hat. Okay. And then rinse and repeat with Comtech. They're private, internal, private copies of their own versions of PSAP boundaries that may or may not agree with what all 57 governing bodies say is authoritative.
And then we've been told that T-Mobile, instead of using Comtech or Intrado, maintains its own
Yes.
routing data.
And so there is no provisioning of PSAP or emergency service boundaries with the PIDFlow, right? The PIDFlow is the caller information, coordinates, and so forth. It's just a different form of, plus additional data, but essentially a different form of what we're working with today for IP E911 alley data.
Yeah, in the early discussions on the grant project, we talked about seeing if T-Mobile, Comtech, and Intrado would give us their existing data so that we could use that as a starting point. And we wound up using, I think, instead the PSAPs, the actual non-warn authorities boundary data as our starting point. But my understanding was they all had that data for routing purposes. The T-Mobile, Comtech, and Intrado. That's why I'm assuming that we would want all of them to have the correct synchronized authoritative data.
It would be nice to be able to regularly acquire a copy of what we might call the hosted PSAP boundaries feature class that's managed by Intrado, to be able to hand it over to Comtech and T-Mobile to help them enhance their quality of services. But that's not a requirement of this tariff, the service in this tariff amendment. It's not a necessary thing. It would be a nice thing in terms of another way to help make service to the citizens better, more efficient.
Well, then should it be? Or should we see if they're willing to do that?
I think it's worth seeing if they're willing to do that for sure. Yeah. But it's not, technically, I don't see it as a requirement. And, Rich Johnston, Doug Cunningham, those guys can and should confirm if what I'm remembering is correct.
I am reaching out to people as we speak, so it's.
Thank you, Kevin.
Jackie's had her hand up for a little bit.
Thank you, Steve. I just wanted to go back to the original question about the management, and from this conversation, it sounds like to me, and I just want to paraphrase this so that I'm clear, that the reason we have management service in here is that when we upload a boundary change, Lumen/Intrado is then responsible for verifying that boundary doesn't interfere with other boundaries and that it matches perfectly. And that is the only management service that we're talking about.
That's how I'm reading the current proposed tariff amendment and how I understand Nina's vision and Intrado's past discussions and statements about the process.
Okay, thank you. And then I have other questions later on. I don't want to muddy the water.
So Jackie, think about all the times that we have reviewed cell tower routing sheets, and oftentimes they used to come with a PDF or maybe lately a geodatabase copy of what Intrado believes our PSAP boundary to be for wireless service or for VoIP service. Those interactions with Intrado and Comtech, with them acting as third-party intermediaries contracting to the OSPs, right?
Right.
This is that same process, but on a BES level for routing of all calls.
That makes sense. Thanks.
So it's very much the same as what Intrado has been doing for years with for managing wireless and VoIP routing data for OSPs as a contractor to the OSPs.
My understanding, though, of this tariff was as drafted as sent by CenturyLink and Intrado was that this was going to be maintenance of Intrado's boundary data for purposes of routing. And, our idea is that we would upload to them or make available to them our authoritative ones that they would use, but not that they would be doing any management or maintenance of the state's authoritative boundaries.
This is sorry. This is Rich Johnston joining from Intrado. So if we want to catch up, I heard enough. I think that I can comment a little bit. Was for the GIS routing portion, our expectation is one of two things. One is to provide the PSAP boundary and be provided that by the GIS authority for that PSAP to use for GIS routing. If that's unavailable or isn't ready, then Intrado can provide one that we already have for the PSAP. We'll send it out for verification that it's usable until such time that the PSAP and the GIS authority for that PSAP have a boundary that they've created. But it's not GIS boundary maintenance or anything like that. We will pass the GIS boundary that we receive through our QAQCs, make sure there's no holes or anything like that, but there's no maintenance of the GIS boundary. We'll take what you give us, we'll verify it'll work, and we'll load it. Or if you don't have anything to give us, we will provide one on your behalf with your okay.
And Rich, if there is a gap or overlap that would be potentially created by someone submitting an updated version of their PSAP boundary, you would pause the process and reach out to them for them and their neighbors, or you would perhaps facilitate with them and their neighbor to resolve that boundary discrepancy. Is that
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Correct. So, there's a couple of different scenarios of that, but as we're loading, pre-deployment, yes, if it really, the way our system works is really first come, first serve. So if we get one loaded, that if PSAP A gets loaded, then PSAP B comes in and there's an overlap, then that would error through our process. We would typically alert that PSAP that submitted it to work with their neighboring area to figure out what the overlap is and who really owns it. If we are needed as a mediary, an intermediary for that, we can all jump on the call and figure it out. But typically it's first in, first served. And then, yeah.
The Colorado 911 Resource Center is working on a GIS project to establish a statewide feature class of PSAP boundaries that's authoritative and has completely clean topology.
Great. If that's the case, we'll load that up. But if in the meantime,
that's the whole point, right? Is that's the foundational that's the cornerstone in the foundation for this, is to have that statewide clean topologies PSAP boundary feature class. And then after that, let's say I upload a new PSAP boundary for Wesco dispatch and it creates an overlap with one of our neighbors.
Yep.
How do you respond?
Yeah. So you'll have a profile to our, it's called a couple of different things. We call it our EGDMS. From a NINA terminology, it's a spatial interface. So we'll give you access to upload your boundary information there. Then at that point, it gets taken in by our system and we do our QA/QCs. If it were to fail with one of those critical errors, one being an overlap or a gap, the GIS authority for that area can go in and pull the errors and statistics for that upload. And that's where it would be notified that there was a critical error and that data was not uploaded due to an overlap.
So you send a notification back of a discrepancy report, to use legacy MSAG and ALI terminology. And then it's on the party, the onus is on the GIS authority or the governing body, as the case may be, to resolve that before the updated PSAP boundary can actually be put into use.
Correct. And just to be real transparent, we don't send it, we process it, and the PSAP will use that spatial interface to retrieve that file. But yes, in essence, we create a report that's available to the GIS authority that will indicate critical errors like that.
Okay. And then I think another question
I'm so sorry, Matt, but if I could just interrupt before we get too far down the road from Jackie Marie's original question.
That's where I was heading.
Yeah, I greatly appreciate the conversation because it's helpful to understand, but I would like to hear from CenturyLink their confirmation that what Jackie Marie asked is what they intended in the language of the tariff.
Do you want to repeat your question, Jackie?
Yeah, my question was, I think on top of Andrew's question, to verify that the management means exactly what they've kind of been talking about in more detailed terms, but the management means that when we change or upload boundaries, if there are any gaps or slivers or places that they don't like and there are critical error, as Rich puts it, they will manage the process of getting those corrected, meaning they will reach out to the authorities and that kind of thing before it's uploaded so that there aren't gaps, etc.
So yeah, the way I would clarify that is that if there are any critical errors such as a gap or overlap, it won't get uploaded. It does not. And the way that is communicated is through a process that the GIS authority that submitted the data goes and pulls the statistics file after the fact. So they would go and upload the data, follow up, let's say the next day, to retrieve the statistics file. Within that data set and that report, it would be indicated what the critical errors were and what needs to get resolved.
Okay, so that then leads to my question, what exactly are you managing? Which was the first question. I believe Andrew asked it. Andrew, if you want to clarify your question. But I was trying to come back to that specific question. What does management entail and mean?
And is that is there a specific line item within the tariff that defines management or that you're referring to so I can take a look at it?
B 27 1
E as an
E.
elephant.
E is an
E.
elephant. E.
And it's not clearly defined, which is why we were asking what it means exactly.
Yeah. So what I would say is that ongoing GS boundary management support. I'm going to read through it. Additional dynamic location management, system configuration, and spatial interface ongoing support. So we provide the tools and the systems and applications to allow for GIS boundary management. So for the solution and service for GIS authorities to manage their data through our spatial interface and therefore our geospatial databases that we use for 911 routing, we provide the tools and the resources to assist the management of those GIS data files. We won't touch that data. We won't manipulate that data, but we help the GIS authorities manage it by providing the tools and, when necessary, the personal resources to guide the GIS authorities to manage it themselves, in essence.
So I think in the tariff, I would like to see that clarified. Because as Andrew said, and what I say, if I read management, I think you're going to take care of the boundaries. And you're going to do the footwork and get it done. That was my understanding. And Andrew, and I speak for you, but I think that was your question too.
Yep.
So I'd like it clearly defined.
Okay, so we'll clarify E.
And if I can, from what Matt has said, as I understand it now, the expectation is the resource centers RFP they issued, I don't know if they've contracted, somebody's going to come back and provide an authoritative statewide boundary layer that, as of the date is completed, is accurate and complete. And we're going to give that to Intrado. Individual #1 authorities can then submit updates to their jurisdictional data. Any change some authority makes in its data will necessarily, its boundaries will necessarily affect a neighbor, an adjoining neighbor, and so that will also have to be changed. And once Intrado makes that change, it will be the only one that has the statewide boundary data as updated. And if other people such as Comtech or T-Mobile or OSPs need that for their routing to you or anything like that, do you get that to them, and do you give that back to us whenever we need or want an updated boundary layer?
So the answer to that is typically no. Whatever authority owns that data is responsible for updating the necessary parties. We can look into the additional management of sending it out to third parties or sending you a full file of what's loaded in our system. But typically that's not part of our service.
Are there third parties that need that in the next gen ecosystem?
Most likely, I would say. I would just say I know that there's third parties out there like Comtech, like Intrado Mobility and VoIP that uses spatial layers to do a locate before route solution. I think in the past they've managed that themselves, going out to the PSAPs to gather that data. It's not been in any ESInet across the country that I've worked with. It's never been the ESInet or spatial interfaces responsibility to update those third parties, but they typically manage that themselves with each individual GIS authority, or if there is a statewide group managing that, they work directly with them.
I've got a quick question in the lull here. Looking over the numbers, Tim, if you can give a summary of how you guys got to the cost. I'm looking at $155.38 per concurrent session. Just doing the quick math for our telephone authority, that's almost a monthly cost of an FTE, maybe without benefits, to merely maintain the routing layer. Can you help us understand those dollars and how you got to it? Especially since this will be a required cost for each authority.
Sure. So working with Intrado, we got our quote from them to do this on a statewide average basis. And then we have a little bit of overhead that gets added and has been the same for the other services. And then the 10.5% markup per the rule comes up with this 155.38. And we do have the backup information that we can provide for those the initial dollars from Intrado, and then the calculation as well.
Yeah, and from an Intrado perspective, there's multiple new systems, applications, people resources that we need to maintain a GIS routing infrastructure. So if you think of it, it's the spatial interface, the configurations to set up the ongoing maintenance of the interface itself, the web portal. We also have a forest guide internally, which is a separate server that allows us to redirect the call, as well as our ECRF internally, and all the monitoring, development, application, people resources for all of those systems. So it's additional systems and monitoring, development, application support of all the different piece parts to allow for GIS routing.
Rich, does your boundary maintenance include response agency boundaries, or does that just include PSAP boundary?
For GIS routing, the only thing that's really needed at this point is the PSAP boundary, not fire, police, EMS, or road center line or address points. If you have that information, we would load it to get ready for I3. I3 is when all that's needed, and that's when it would start to be real important to get it in there. But since this is for just GIS routing using PSAP boundary information, that's the only required boundary for now.
And if we're having our data layer created by a third party, and then say OIT or someone was going to be maintaining, updating any changes, and we would update to you a new layer, would that change your cost structure?
No, we would take in the new layers as part of it. We want to prepare for I3, so we would take in that information and process it. It's just not used for GIS routing at this time, or wouldn't be used until we move forward to I3.
And are you providing GIS routing at this time, or are you going to start on March 1st?
We would start as soon as this tariff allows us to start. So we have the capability to do it, but we're not doing it because we don't have the spatial boundaries. We don't have a way to, a contractual or tariff way to do it. So we have the capability to do it, but we're not doing it in Colorado today.
And you said you don't have the geospatial boundaries yet.
We don't have them from the state. We do have a layer that we would be comfortable moving forward with. That is layers for every PSAP in the state of Colorado that are managed by a different group within Intrado. We believe it's important to move forward with GIS routing. So we, within this tariff, have offered to use what we have, but we're not currently using that now. So we do have layers, geospatial layers for every PSAP in Colorado available to use with with the PSAPs and GIS authorities okay, but they're not built right now. They're not built within the Colorado system right now.
Okay, there's a question of when GIS is going to be available, and whether we'd be paying for a service that we weren't yet getting.
So we could and would make it available as soon as possible. We can get those layers that Entrado have created together very quickly. Obviously, I think the sooner the better on GIS routing. We've seen very successful outcomes come from GIS routing, especially when we're talking about obviously wireless calls. So we could turn it up very quickly using our boundaries as in the interim as we wait for that, statewide layer to come in.
Tim, I'd like to take you up on your offer to share more detail. I think Rich verbally went through some of the breakdown of those costs, but since you offered to provide more information on how those costs were determined, I think this group would appreciate seeing some of those details.
Sure, you bet.
All right, Jennifer, I see your hand up.
Thanks, Steve. Actually, I was going to say commission rule requires CenturyLink to file that documentation so that we can ensure that it's in line with commission rules regarding the amount of percentage for profit. So when you filing that documentation along with the original tariff filing will be helpful. Also, when you file, whether or not, I know you said verbally that this would be a core feature, but according to the new rules, you'll need to spell that out in the tariff filing. So just a note for that. And then I was curious why CenturyLink is choosing to file only GIS routing and not the other services that were being previously debated earlier in the year.
Well, thanks for the clarification on the core service notation in the tariff. So we'll get that fixed. And yes, we would certainly file the backup information when it's officially filed. So that's just why it hasn't been put out there yet, but we'll provide that information. And then as far as the question on the other services, well, the other services would be optional, and it just didn't seem to make a lot of sense to put the optional services in the tariff and go through the protest process for optional services that can be purchased by others. So that's why we haven't put that in there at this time.
Great.
But we're open to
Thank you.
discussing it further.
Appreciate it.
Jackie, you
Well,
guys-
they need to be in the tariff if they're going to be paid for out of the 911 surcharge, or don't they? Or should be.
Yes, Joe, but I just wondered why they weren't filing right now. And Tim just said that they didn't think they wanted to go through the process right now to offer those services optionally at this time.
Eat the elephant one bite at a time, I suppose.
So
Jack-
my question is along those lines. I was kind of surprised not to see them too, only because if this tariff had been filed sooner, we could have included it in the rate procedure with the staff being able to look at it. So I'm curious as to CenturyLink's plan for the date of March 2026 and how we include that in the rate procedure that is already started and the staff has already had their decisions made. And so I know I've talked to staff about it, but just wanted to make sure everybody is aware of what needs to happen if we're going to move forward with this in 2026 with funding.
Well, one of the reasons we asked them to share this with us before filing was so that we could hopefully resolve any issues and not have to have a contested proceeding so the rates could be approved.
I understand that, but there's no optional services, so there was no need to wait for the rulemaking.
Yeah. Well, and I thought that they wanted to go forward with, for example, text to 911 over the ESInet because I understand there are authorities that want to implement that and the concern was there are authorities that can't implement it yet and shouldn't have to pay for it. They're not going to get diversity, which is what's provided when you get text over the ESInet for many of the authorities. Some of the authorities.
Jennifer?
Yeah, I don't want to step on CenturyLink's opportunity to answer Jackie's question, but I do want to clarify that the comment period for the rates for next year is open until August 22nd, and any interested party can file comments into that proceeding, suggesting that the commission take this into account if the tariff is filed prior to the closing of the comment period, so that the commission has data to consider at the time.
Good, thanks, Jennifer. Tim, do you have anything further on Jackie's question before we get to Matt, who just raised his hand?
I guess I didn't quite understand it to be a question. I thought she was making a statement. I apologize. You want to
No,
repeat that?
Tim, it's a question as why, if the optional services were pulled, I'm not sure why we weren't discussing this in June so that you could file it in time for the staff to look at this as part of the rate setting versus now you would have to file the tariff and then file comments on the rate procedure to ask it to be included. And so my question, I'm curious that, since it wasn't dependent on the rule making any longer, when you pulled the optional services, it no longer was dependent on the rulemaking. And so I'm curious as to why we didn't discuss this sooner so that it could have been officially part of the rate setting as opposed to in comments in the rate setting.
Well, we had this on the table quite a while ago, and then when the other proceedings got in the way of it, that's what slowed this process down. If y'all want, the optional services in the tariff, how do we? Can there be a provision that allows us to be reactive to the market, since none of our competitors who would offer these optional services are going through this process? And so, part of it is with the rules being approved as they are. How do we have some latitude to make adjustments to optional services without going through a fully contested process? I think that's our main concern with the optional services as it played out in the rulemaking.
Right, and I understand that. My question is more to, since this tariff that we're talking about right now, without the optional services, I'm not going to make a determination on whether we want them or not, right? But when you pulled the optional services from this tariff amendment, the timing could have been sooner because the rulemaking was to determine optional services, not to determine core services. And so I'm just curious as to the timeline and what's the expectation of Lumen to get this into the rate setting.
Well, I think the rule did cover both, but our intention is to file this as soon as possible. I think we were hoping to meet a little sooner. It just didn't work out, but we're prepared to file this as soon as possible.
What competitor can deliver text to 911 over the ESInet?
Well, I don't think that's the optional service. The optional service is text, right?
Hi, everyone, it's Tina, and I might be very ignorant, but I guess my question is text an optional service, truly?
I think, Tina, this is Kimberly, the optional service, for example, we have it over the top. And if we put it on the ESInet, from a diversity perspective, we probably wouldn't do that, because if there's a problem in the ESInet, we at least can still offer text through a different network path. If we're able to do both, we may look at it as a redundant path, but that was the whole question about whether you can even have your text set up to be delivered over the ESInet and still over the top through those solutions that we all have today.
Thanks, that's helpful.
And Tim, this is Rich Johnston. I apologize to you and the group. I do have to drop for another call.
Yeah, I'm gonna bring us kind of to a wrapping up as a closure. We've had a lot of great conversation. I have one quick, more detailed comment. One of the first things we talked about was letter D, talking about the redundancy of the word accurate. I would also ask that we define accurate. I think that's a subjective term, especially for a tariff, because when you're talking about location-based information, how do you determine accurate? So either define it within with a measurement, or come up with maybe a different word would be my suggestion. We don't have to wordsmith it over the group.
I can do that. We have a setting of a certain radius confidence level,
That'd be
so
perfect.
we can define that.
Yeah, Jackie, you have a last minute comment?
I do. I'm
Question?
sorry. I know we're running late. I had a question on F. And it is critical that the proper data validation and synchronization tasks have been completed prior to the provision of GIS data. I would like the proper data validation and synchronization task listed out so that we are clear on what we need to do on our end.
All right, that's good to add. Sounds like there's some wordsmithing and changes made for this document. Tim, can you make those and then send it back out to myself, Kathy, and Jennifer, and then we'll redistribute to the group for another set of eyes on it.
And I'll provide the other additional backup information.
Yeah, that'd be great.
I had one last quick question. That's whether any of those other services such as TDMS or the protocol conversion service, are they prerequisites to the phase 1 or phase 2 OSP, delivery by INSIP and especially PITFlow, or are any of those prerequisites to your offering those, be able to provide handle receipt of SIP or PITFlow under phase 1 or phase 2 service?
Kevin, do you know the answer to that? I think you hadn't joined when Joe asked that the first time, and it looks like Rich had already dropped. Kevin?
Kevin, you still there?
I am, and I wasn't paying attention. Ask the question again, please.
I was asking about the transition to the phase 1, phase 2 from the FCC, the discussion we had yesterday, and whether or not this or any of the others that we have talked about in the past, any of those services are prerequisites to completing that phase 1 or phase 2 transition.
So phase 1 is complete. So phase 2, I don't believe this is anything dependent on phase 2. There was a lot of conversation yesterday, and I think they were combining a lot of topics. I do not believe that, but I'm not the ultimate authority on that.
Yeah, the services, other services were TDMS and I3 protocol conversion.
Right. So I don't know. I'm not qualified to answer that.
So the protocol conversion is to enable doing PITFlow.
So when you say protocol conversion, exactly what protocol are you referring to?
I don't know. Your
Okay.
tariff said I3 protocol conversion.
Okay, all right.
Kevin, my remembrance of it was essentially it's changing from what we have today for alley service
Right.
delivery to direct delivery with the call using the Pitaflow data format.
So my understanding's a little different than what he did. That's why I said I don't want to commit.
Mm-hmm.
Because my understanding is a little different than what was stated yesterday.
Well, maybe it would be better if the
We would get in
CenturyLink
touch with-
team could give us an email with it.
And I would need Doug Cunningham to actually,
Mhm.
we have a couple architects, Dave Shearhart and Doug Cunningham, who work in tandem on that stuff. And they can actually address it in a much more concise way than me.
Kevin, can you and Tim facilitate that for
I will
Tim's?
do that. I will reach out to them.
Awesome.
Thank you,
Okay.
Kevin.
Thank you, guys. All right, anything else? We're into people's lunch hour again. Just want to check any last minute for CenturyLink. All right, thank you guys, everyone, for the participation, good conversation, and we look forward to hearing back from CenturyLink on the the final answers to the questions.
Thanks, Tim.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
We'll get back to
everybody.
you as soon as we can.
Thanks, everybody.